Good afternoon, everybody. Hope your Wednesday's gone very, very well. And I'm delighted to be joined by football manager Alex Neil to discuss your career so far and what's in store for the future. Alex, good afternoon. How are you?
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good.
Well, thanks so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. I guess you've had a little bit of time out of work as a manager. I always think that's a really valuable thing that even the best managers in the world, like Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp, really value. What do you think is really important for a manager when they've had their time away from the game, I guess?
I think a couple of things. I think the first thing is probably to refresh. I think that I don't think people realise how full on the job is. The pressure and more importantly, the pressure that you put on yourself. Because you're taking over a club where the fans and certainly people that work there, it's their sort of day-to-day living. They've supported their club all their lives and different things like that. So it's so important that you invest yourself and all your efforts into try to make it a success. So that becomes all encompassing for you in terms of what your aim is, what your life looks like for the period you're there. So I think when you come out it, I think that time to sort of refresh and try and get a bit of yourself back is important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough balancing act, isn't it? Because you kind of want to reconnect with your family because sometimes it's really hard to do that when you're in management because it doesn't offer much personal time. But also you want to kind of keep your eye in the game and make sure that you're up to date with everything and you've got your eye in the market, so to speak. It's a tricky balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, and I think a lot of the experienced managers in the Championship that have done it for over 5, 6 years, I think we know the ins and outs of the Championship reasonably well. So I think if you do take, I don't know, a couple of months for yourself or whatever, I don't think anything's really going to happen that you wouldn't expect or you won't know about. So I think in that respect, I think that side of it, certainly from my own perspective, I've been out recently, and I've only really started going out to a few games. I've been to 3 games in the last just week and a half. Like you say, it's starting to heat up. We're at that stage of the season now where it really is crunch time at the top and bottom end of the table.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy in some of those leagues across the EFL, isn't it? Where there's lots of teams bunched together. It really makes for an exciting end to the season. So what do I need to understand, Alex, about your I guess upbringing and your sort of experiences and mentors, I guess, earlier on in your life to understand the manager that stands in front of me today?
Oh, I think like most players, when I was younger, there wasn't so much academies as there is now. That wasn't really the case. So for me, I sort of played more boys club football right up till I was probably 15, 16, which is quite common in those days.
Right.
And like most players, you need to be in the right place at the right time. You need to have enough quality, enough determination as well about yourself to make it as a player. But I never played at the top levels. I played in the Championship for a few years. I played in the Scottish Premier League for quite a few years. So I had an okay career, but I think as a player, what my shortcomings were, and maybe athletically, um, um, was probably my biggest weakness, really. That these shortcomings sort of get made up for sort of determination, um, probably understanding of the game, being able to help teammates on the pitch, and that sort of led me down a line of getting into coaching. When I started to sort of my career was coming to an end. Um, so yeah, I've always had a keen interest, but I never really had any intention of being a manager, if I'm honest.
Okay.
The manager that probably really changed my career was Billy Reid, who's obviously number 2 to Graham Potter. But I was Billy's captain for a long time, I think about 7 years, 8 years. And
What?
then when
Why
Billy,
Billy Reid, Alex? What was it about him that really sort of inspired you?
I think just trust that he had in me, and the trust that I had in him. I think that's probably Hamilton's best ever sort of period in their history, I think, in terms of those teams over that maybe 6, 7 year period where Billy was in charge, and then obviously I had it for a couple of years before I left. But that was certainly what sort of formed me as a sort of a player and as a coach, really. And like I say, when Billy left, I was obviously really saddened and shocked. But at that point, they gave me the sort of reins, if you like, to take it to the end of the season. And And I think because I've been captain for so long, I've been so influential there that if a new manager walked in, I would have probably been the one that would have went, if you like.
Yeah.
So I was fully aware of that. And then we finished the season really strongly. And then they asked me to take it for the next season, which we then got promotion in. And that first couple of years from Hamilton to Norwich, getting promoted with Hamilton, playing in the Premier League with Hamilton and doing really well. We beat Celtic, we beat Motherwell twice, we beat Aberdeen, so we went on a terrific run. And then the Norwich opportunity came up and I got thrust into that. So for that first couple of years, when people say it was a whirlwind, it certainly was for me at that point.
Yeah, incredible achievements, by the way, at Hamilton Academicals to get them promoted and then top of the Scottish Premiership. When you went to Norwich City, you were obviously younger than a lot of the Norwich squad, or at a similar age to even to a lot of others, because it was quite an old squad generally. And I'm always really curious, Alex, how much is that sort of dynamic of being at a similar age or even younger than some of the first team players? Is that a bigger challenge for a manager in the eyes of external perception? Do the media make it a bigger thing than it actually is, or did you find it was a genuine challenge that you had to use your motivational skills to overcome?
I think it depends on your personality as a coach, because I think some people are very sort of self-conscious of the fact that they aren't senior in terms of age or even experience. And albeit I'd moved to a different level and Norwich was a much higher level, I was so confident in my ability at the time because in my really, really brief coaching career at that point, I'd only known success. So I didn't go in with any sort of fear of failure. I didn't go in with any misconceptions of what I could and I couldn't do. I just seen it as an unbelievable opportunity for me. And I think timing when you go somewhere is vitally important. And the more jobs that I've had, the more you realise that. And when I went into Norwich, the timing of me getting that role was crucial because there was certainly enough games for us to turn the season around. And also, I went into a squad which knew that they'd maybe underperformed a little bit, but were so determined to put it right. So there wasn't a lot of me having to sort of show that I was in charge. There wasn't a lot of battles politically or behind the scenes. It was really a case of get this team organised, get it sort of motivated, and let's go and try and see what we can do this season. And we all sort of bounced off each other really, and because we all aimed for the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose you had some fantastic professionals in that squad, didn't you? Stephen Whittaker, Russ Martin, Seb Basong, Alex Tetty. I mean, that's going to help a lot.
Unbelievable squad of players, in terms of quality. I think it was very well balanced, the squad as well. With the width of Nathan Redmond off one side, Bradley Johnston tucked in off the left another, with the pace of Cameron Jerome up top and Lewis Graben sort of sinking off. You had the trickery of Wes Hoolahan. And like you say, the first half of the season, Seb Basong was actually at Watford.
Oh, okay.
And I brought him back in the January. So yeah, that was probably one of my challenges was getting that to sort of work and get that gelled between then and the end of the season. But I do believe that certainly that move of bringing Seb back and getting him integrated back into the team was a big factor in us getting promoted that year.
Yeah, certainly was. I remember quite early on in your career, you had a 2-1 home defeat to Brentford, and I think you were very honest. It's one of these things that sticks in my head where you're asked about having to play Stephen Whittaker in midfield when he's primarily a right back, and I think you said something like it was the least of my worries. And I just wonder if the honesty and the sort of directness fans maybe found refreshing, I guess, or the players found refreshing as well.
Yeah, I think it sort of helped me to a large degree at the start, but also became a hindrance as it sort of went on. Because when you're too honest, sometimes, that can have its own challenges.
Yeah.
So, and I always started out because I always watched press conferences when I was a young player and different things because I'm a football fan first and foremost. And I always watched press conferences thinking, I wish he would just say what he really thinks. And I sort of adopted the approach when I started that I wanted to be the type of coach where you looked at it and thought, yeah, he's telling you what his real thoughts are. So that's certainly how I set out. I'd certainly say I've dialed it back a little bit as years have gone by, because it's sort of made own problems for myself as time wore on. And I do believe now, I think now, because of the powers of social media and stuff as well, I do believe people are much more delicate than what they used to be. I think that you used to be able to tell people like a few home truths and stuff, and they would come back at you and say likewise. And but you would get on with it, you would take it in the chin. It was part of how things were done. Whereas I think now, you want to avoid that if you can.
Do you know what, though? I actually think that for modern players, I've never been in a dressing room, I've never worked in the game, so I'm coming at this from the outside, Alex. But I feel as though, I don't know that you can't tell players the truth in the modern era, but I do think that the language that you use and how you convey it is important, and also giving them the space to say what they think is really important as well. I don't think you necessarily have to act or say something you don't mean, but I think you also have to communicate it in a way that's helpful for them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think where I'm leading it to is, I think if it was just that one-off discussion between you and the players, or that one discussion between you and our player, I think modern day players can take that no problem. I think the difficulty you've got is if you come out and you be interviewed after the game, what happens is when you say things, I think social media then misconstrues it in a manner which they read into it. Players read that stuff, whatever any of them want to say, they all read it. Their agents read it, their parents read it, their friends read it, and it gets retweeted and it gets resent and it gets re-whatevered, and it ends up becoming something that it wasn't meant to be. So I don't think the actual discussion point where you're speaking to your team at halftime or full time is got anything in it other than what you genuinely think. I think that you need to be careful how you're then portrayed beyond that,
In the
because
media,
because once you've said it, people like to take hits of it and sort of decipher it the way that they choose to. So that's probably became the bigger challenge as times wore on, because what used to happen was you used to have an interview and whatever was said was basically printed in the paper as quotes, and then it never really went any further. And if they read the paper, they seen it. If they didn't, then they didn't. Whereas that's certainly changed now.
Yeah, I think a lot of modern media is so oriented around getting the clicks that they put the big headline in stuff, and they put the context in sort of later. But by the time, a lot of people don't actually take the time to read the whole thing, so sometimes things can get taken out of context. But that's for another day, isn't it? So just quickly, that winning at Wembley, beating Middlesbrough, was obviously glorious moment. You must have felt, was it a bit surreal, I suppose, coming so in the space, so much happening in the space of 18 months for you as a manager?
Yeah, it was surreal. I think at the time I didn't really take it in how much an achievement it was. Because I think when you've had success and then you've won promotion the first season, and then I basically won promotion within 6 months of moving to the next club. At that point, for me, albeit I certainly didn't have a career where I was winning promotion regularly either. Do you know what I mean? So it was a big thing, but I don't know. It was just, it never really sunk in until I came away from it and then looked back and thought, what an unbelievable achievement that they both teams managed to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it was nice getting a couple of early goals, wasn't it, in that final?
Yeah.
Certainly helped. So you moved on into the challenge of the Premier League, and I think at the time there was so much excitement at the momentum you found. It was pretty much title-winning form, I think, in the second half of that season. But do you think that, given how quickly things escalated for you, would it have been better for you to go in as a Premier League manager after another year or two working in the Championship? Because the intensity of the Premier League is very different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think what I didn't realise at the time, because bearing in mind, when I went into Norwich, we were midway through a window. So I think the only signing I made that window was Graham Dorrans to the end of the season. So we didn't sign any other players. And when you're at Hamilton Accies, there was no money anyway. So you sign frees and you sign guys who you went and scouted at other teams, but you picked them up for nothing. They weren't. You would never pay. They were never paying fees for players at that stage. So I think that when you get to the Premier League, because of the riches that are involved with it, if you go up as a Championship club and you don't invest properly at that time, that's going to come back to haunt you. I can't remember any real Championship teams in recent years that have went up, not spent anything, and been completely fine. I think there'll be few and far between. If there is any, there might have been a couple that probably shouldn't have been the Championship in the first place. But certainly, I think for me, looking back, that element and that side of things I was very naive to,
Right.
because I'd no experience of it.
Okay.
So I just felt, give me a set of players, I'll coach them, we'll go and win games, and we'll all be fine. So, which when you get to the best league in the world, it proves to be a lot harder than obviously that. So yeah, I think for me, I think the one mistake we made, and I'm not even sure if it's a mistake because I don't think we could have remedied it because we were a self-sustaining club, as Norwich still
Mm.
are. A lot of people are unaware of that, which I think speaks volumes of how well Norwich has been run over the years to achieve what they've done.
Yeah.
So yeah, we couldn't have spent any money in it. I think we sold Bradley Johnson in the summer, and we brought in Robbie Brady. But Robbie Brady basically signed the first day that the money dropped into the bank for the Premier League, which was the second week in August, because we
Right.
didn't have any money. Because although that you win promotion, people think you get a cheque that day for 100 million, whereas that money gets distributed across the season. So yeah, we invested in January, which basically gave teams 6 months at a start, and at that level, you're never really going to get away with that. Then you've got the issues of integrating new players that are coming from different leagues into a team in the middle of a sort of Premier League season, which in itself is difficult.
Do you think in that, if I put you back to that summer of 2015, do you think you could have done with someone who's got a bit of a footballing mind upstairs, a sporting director or a director of football type figure that's a bit more experienced and would have been able to maybe guide you through that process and had a bit more awareness perhaps of what might have been needed?
I'm not really sure, Gabs. That's what I was saying because the difficulty I had was now in reflection, I knew what the issues were. But we simply didn't have the finances to resolve
Right.
the
Yeah.
issues anyway.
Okay.
So looking back, if you were to say to me, I would have probably have fought harder to see if we could have got any sort of finance to help us at that point.
Mm.
But I don't believe it would have been with any success because that wasn't the way the club was running, the way the club
Right.
functioned. So and even in reflection, I spoke to the people who were there at the time. Because, like I say, I was naive to it, so it wasn't something that was a big talking point, but it probably should have been. But even when we spoke about it afterwards, their view on it was the same in the fact that we function as the money comes in, then we can use it. But when it's not in the building, there isn't somebody who's got 20, 30 million that's willing to put that in and then get it back later down the line. So, yeah, I don't think that would have made much difference, but I'd have certainly known about it more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So coming back into, I suppose in that Premier League season, you did have a couple of memorable games, like winning at Old Trafford with the Alex Tettey goal as well. Can you just talk us through a little bit about that day, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that it wasn't even one of our best performances away at Old Trafford, strangely. And I think Louis van Gaal was the manager at the time.
Mm.
Like you say, we won the game. I think we were leading 2-0 and then they scored late on to make it 2-1. And then obviously at Old Trafford, you'd expect you need to defend well for the last 10 minutes to see the game out, which we did. I think one of our better performances was probably at Anfield when we drew one each.
Okay.
Russell Martin scored because I remember it specifically because Russell had his baby the night before.
Oh my
And
God! Right.
so he wasn't with the squad and then travelled up. I don't know if it was by helicopter or I don't know if he would come on the jet or whatever, but the deal you had, but he came up and he scored the goal, the equaliser at Anfield. I think that was Brendan Rodgers' last game at Anfield that day.
Right.
So that was one that stood out in my mind because of how well we played, and it's a difficult venue as well to go to. So we had a good few games. I think by Christmas we were sitting in a pretty good position. I think we had 20 plus points at that point. Our
Mm.
second half of the season, which I think is always the telling aspect of the Premier League, because you put absolutely everything into the first half just to stay with these teams, and by the time you got to the second half, we didn't have anything left, and ultimately that's where we come up a little bit short, and that was the season, if you remember, that Sam went to Sunderland.
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah.
And beat Chelsea and picked up some results where you think that there was no sign that they were going to do that. And that was, they were the sort of ones that pipped us at the post, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought Tim Closer was really good in the second half of that season. And did you hold Man City around like March or April or something? But yeah, unfortunately, it was the financial disparity was a bit too much. I guess I look at when Norwich City bounced back a few years later after relegation from the Premier League, they were able to rejuvenate an aging squad. Well, was it an age? Well, they're able to
Yeah,
rejuvenate the squad and bring in fresh players. And I guess coming into the summer of 2016, you didn't have that same investment. I think you brought in Sergi Canos and 6 players, I think it was. But maybe would you have wanted more in an ideal world to sort of rejuvenate things?
I think, like you just said there, Gabs, and you're right. It was an aging squad. You know,
Mm,
that was the biggest dilemma, and again, something that I hadn't came across in terms of I'd only worked with 2 squads, and I hadn't had the experience of naturally seeing a squad age and get older and think, right, I need to start turning this round. I remember a discussion we had about that summer with the board. What we were discussing was the fact that we had James Maddison, Ben Godfrey, Max Aarons, Jamal Lewis, all these lads were coming through, so they were already in the building. The Murphys
mm,
and Carlton Morris, he was another one, they were all there. And we
yeah,
discussed the fact that these boys weren't ready to get us promoted. But when you come down from the Premier League, being one of the teams that come down, the expectancy is you should be going straight back up, you know, because you've been in the Premier League. So, but we had a discussion that summer in regards to we need to start bleeding some of these young players in because the squad's naturally starting to get a bit older now. Do you know what I mean? With a lot of plus 30s in terms of players, and we need
mm,
to start bleeding these in. But if we're going to bleed them in and give them what they need, they're not going to be ready to get us out of the league.
mm,
And the overwhelming sort of talking point was we want promoted. And I was like, right, okay. So in terms of integrating those lads, it probably came at that expense a little bit. The fact we were trying to get promoted automatically. Um, and then when I did leave, I think it was Daniel Farker came in right afterwards, and all the younger lads started to play. But
mm,
that season, the team finished 14th in the league, having just come down.
yeah,
Whereas I'm not getting a 14th. You know, I came down with the team, and well, hence the reason why I left. I think we were 8th when I left, and then
mm,
we finished 8th. This next season, they finished 14th, but all the younger kids get more games, and then
mm,
the next year they came up. So that was certainly what was required. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about timing. You know, that Daniel come in at a time where because you're the next guy, you get afforded more time to get it right than the guy who's obviously in post at that
mm.
point because yeah, well naturally you're tarnished with the fact that the team's come down.
Yeah, it puts a different slant on things, doesn't it? Because it's like, well, we need to rebuild. Whereas
Of course.
whenever you've just come down, there is always that pressure on returning straight away. So that was, I guess, that was an awkward position. But what I was, what's your reflection on your time at Norwich City as well? Because it's obviously quite a unique club with where it is in the country and a very loyal fan base. Do you have some fond memories of managing at Carrow Road?
Yeah, I think I'll always owe Norwich a debt of gratitude in the fact that they took such a chance and such a risk on an unknown really from Scotland at a small club to come down and take over a sort of title charge, shall we say? So yeah, I was extremely fortunate that they were brave enough to do that. I think naturally when I went, it was always a case of who's this guy type thing. So I had everything to prove, which I
Yeah.
think is a good position to be in as a coach. You know that the fact that there's so much interest in it, and you've got to then go and show them that you deserve to be there. So I really enjoyed that. And the fans in my time there were nothing but completely supportive. You know, with an unbelievable day at Wembley, and I even remember it was probably the most humble and sort of embarrassing period in my career is when we got relegated. That the fans sort of clapped us round and was singing my name and different things, and that was really unusual for me because
Mm.
I felt quite embarrassed if I'm honest. You know that
Yeah,
I didn't
you don't
I
quite know
didn't
how to respond to it almost.
yeah, I didn't enjoy it, but equally I appreciated it because
Yeah.
it could have been very much different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows it's a very patient fan base. And I guess I wanted to move on to Preston North End because what I really liked about your North End side, maybe especially in 17-18, although you could argue, yeah, certainly continued for another couple of seasons after that, was you could see a real clear identity about that side. It was energetic, it was tenacious, and it was really incisive in those transitional moments. And it felt like you could see there, what an Alex Neil team looks like.
Yeah, I think I was speaking the other day. I think it was the radio I was doing, and we were talking about Preston. Obviously, I still live in the Preston area. You know, my family were settled here, and Preston really, I think, was the team that that I needed after Norwich. You know, I needed to go somewhere because, albeit I'd won 2 promotions, I'd only managed for basically, I think, 2.5 years at that point, maybe 3 seasons.
Mm.
So it was a really, really sort of baptism of fire. And I needed to go somewhere and basically sort of find my feet and find what I wanted to do as a manager and how I wanted my team to look. And I think that Preston was a terrific sort of club for me to go and do that. You know, I loved that squad and that team that I had as well. You know, that I built probably stronger bonds as you can probably build with players, really.
Yeah.
You know, because there was a few opportunities for me to leave, and I didn't because how much I believed in that team and those players. And I think what was great for that team was the fact that I picked a lot of the lads up when they were like 21, 22. So they
Mm.
were really just wanting to start making their names in their career. And over the next 3-4 seasons, they certainly did that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must have been great to work with Ben Pearson, who I think in that sort of mid to late 2010s period, he was probably one of the best ball winners in the Championship in that time.
Yeah, for me, Ben was the best six in the league. You know, I said that repeatedly in my time working with him. Obviously, I've subsequently took him to Stoke as well.
Mm.
But yeah, I believe in Ben as a player. You know, I think him and Paul Gallagher and Alan Brown, Daniel Johnson in that period is a four in the middle of the pitch were certainly a match for anybody in the division.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think if Daniel Johnson had been able to stay fit in that 1920 season, that maybe things could have been different and you might have been able to sustain that form?
I think they're always hard to answer. The questions, aren't they? You know,
Yeah.
I think what it would have done, they gave us a more, they gave us a better opportunity. I don't think there's any doubts because naturally, the more players that you've got fit and available who are of good quality, the better chance you've got of those fine margins turning in your favour. So it's hard to say how much, if any, difference it would have made. But certainly, when you've got your best players fit and available, that's when you're always going to stand the best chance of being successful.
Yeah, certainly. I felt like for a couple of seasons you were North End were two or three players away from being a real top six side. I felt like maybe the left back spot, if you'd had someone who could really get up and down, and maybe a replacement for Jordan Hugill. I felt like you were missing those kind of key positions for a little bit of time, and it felt like you were so close to being a top six side. Is that how it felt from the dugout?
Yeah, I wouldn't say left back because I think we
Okay.
had Greg Cunningham, who I moved on to Cardiff. So we sold Greg for really good money. I think we got 3.5 million in for Greg, which was great business for a left back. But on the back of that, we signed Andrew Hughes, who I would think have been probably one of my best signings at Preston. That with his consistency and how well he's done for that team.
Yeah, I suppose he's solid defensively, certainly,
Yeah,
and I do take that point. I think, yeah. Do you feel like in terms of investment, working with a bottom six budget at North End, you could have it was a bit difficult to get the players in that you needed in certain positions?
yeah. I think the frustration I had there was different because I understood Preston weren't going to put like millions on the table and say, right, we'll buy him, we'll buy him, we'll buy him. So I was fully aware of that. I think where my frustration over time came was the fact that in my 4 years there, we sold over £20 million worth of players. Do you know what I mean? We sold like Jordan Hugo for 8 million, Callum Robinson for 7 million, Greg Cunningham for 3.5. I mean, there was a lot of sales in there that generated a lot of cash. Um, and I think if we got a good proportion of that, or at least a half of it back, we could have invested in, like you say, I think we would have certainly made the top six at that point if that was the case.
Yeah, you're very close for a number for 3 seasons, weren't you? I felt like maybe towards the end of your time, a little bit like we saw with possibly Norwich City, you had the aging squad and you're reliant on this core, many of which had come up under Simon Grayson in 2015. And was it a case of not quite having the resources to really rejuvenate the squad at that point, as well as a few of the contract situations kind of rumbling on as well?
No, I think towards the end of my time there, I think the team that I'd assembled for that 4 year period was gradually just like becoming apart. Really, do you know what I mean? It was getting stripped and people were leaving. So I think that January we sold Darnell Fisher,
Mm.
who I think was my first signing when I went in at Preston. We'd sold Callum Robinson. Um, I think Tom Barkhuizen's contract was coming to an end. Ben Pearson and Ben Davies had just left in that window. Paul Gallagher had stopped playing. So that team and that sort of the focal points that had been the key part of that team for 4 years were getting stripped away. And I think I probably get too emotionally invested in that team, because I think when that team was coming apart, instead of me focusing on what the next bit looked like and getting the next one sorted, I struggled to accept that team was basically coming to an end.
Interesting. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Feeling really attached and connected to a certain group of players, because on the one hand, that's probably what allows you to motivate them really well and allow them to achieve some of the results that they did. But then you also sometimes, as a manager, need that ruthless streak at certain moments as well.
Yeah, I don't think the ruthless streak was ever an issue for me, Gabs. You know, it wasn't something that I ever struggled with.
Right.
But I think when I really believe in something and I'm all in, I find it really difficult then behind the scenes, shall we say, to be plotting and planning what their sort of next one looks like for them, you know, because I really believed in that team. And bearing in mind, we weren't talking about guys like Paul Gallagher was probably the exception, because Paul was in his 30s at that point. So obviously he was naturally, hence the reason why we signed Ben Whiteman to sort of take over that type of role. But the likes of Ben Pearson, Ben Davies, Callum Robinson, Daniel Fisher, when they all left, they were still on their peak. Do you know what I mean? They were like 25, 26, I think, at the time. So I think that's where I struggled, was the fact that if it was an aging team, I don't think I would have had any issues with that. But I felt with the players leaving that the team was getting weaker. And I think that's where I sort of struggled to accept, because naturally when you go in as a coach, you want to progress every year, don't you? So you want to see that sign of progression. Whereas I felt when they were leaving, in my opinion, at that point, it was a sign of regression. And that's probably where that's probably where I didn't handle it as well as I probably should have.
Right. I think my perception of Preston North End from the outside is that as a club, they give managers quite a lot of autonomy in the transfer market. Is that something that you enjoy as a manager, having control and a big say over the recruitment process?
I think recruitment process at every club and autonomy is a myth at championship level. And what I mean by that is, albeit as a coach, you do have the final say, albeit as a coach, you are heavily involved in the decision-making process. But for instance, at Preston North End, Peter Ridsdale, if Peter didn't want us to sign a player, then naturally we wouldn't have signed the player, because it was a collaborative approach. Do you know what I mean? In every club that I've ever been at, there's always a collaborative approach. So when I was at Norwich, it wasn't just a case of me saying, I want him, we sign him. That was never the case. It was a discussion point. It'd be, I don't know, whoever the powers that be at that time, would be 4 or 5 years in the room, and you would discuss it, and you'd say, right, who do we think's our best options? Everybody would have an opinion on it, and then we would try and come to the best conclusion for us moving forward. So that was very much the case at Preston with Peter. It was very much the case at Sunderland, albeit their model's slightly different. But again, it would be a discussion point, and certainly at Stoke was the same as well. You know, it wasn't like it wasn't a one-man band, shall we say? And I don't think any team really functions that way. Not in my knowledge.
My sort of perception on a healthy recruitment process from the outside, again, someone who's never worked in the game, is you want the manager to feel free to have an input on the recruitment process. So if there's a player that they feel like they really want, then obviously that's a conversation and you do it if it's viable. At the same time, I think you don't want to put too much pressure on the manager, because they've got their day-to-day focus on coaching the team select, preparing for matches, all the rest of it. And actually you want to make sure that there is a sort of a due process going on elsewhere that can sort of profile the players that the club needs.
That's exactly how it works. Everywhere I've been, that's exactly how it works. So the manager, in my case, me, only really gets involved towards the later stage of the process, once these players have been highlighted in the fact, right, we've got 4 left backs. These are the left backs that we're looking at. This is the clips. This is their data. There's a few games for you to watch, and you can let us know what your thoughts are. And that gets fed out through the coaching staff as well. So the coaching staff get to watch them, and then we had a group where all the lads would feedback their preferences and their thoughts on the player. And then what we would do is all their thoughts and all their feedback would go into the room with me, and I would then express my feelings on it, what the feelings of the staff were on certain players, and it would be a discussion, a talking point through the head of recruitment, through whether it be the chief exec, technical director, owner's advisor, as it was at Preston. Then that's how it went, and then we made what we believed at the time, which was good value in terms of how much we would spend as a club for that position, because every position generally you allocate what you would be willing to spend in that position. So there were some players that you would want, but they're automatically ruled out because they were too expensive, and that doesn't matter what club you're at. It's very much similar to most clubs.
Absolutely. I do feel, though, Sunderland operate a little bit differently, because they do seem to be very extreme on the youth-heavy side of the spectrum, if you like, under Christian Speakman. And I suppose I'm curious, for Tony Mowbray, it seemed to be a case that sort of maybe slight differences on recruitment was maybe one factor behind the ultimate outcome there. Was it a similar story for you at Sunderland?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll say about Sunderland though is when you walk in the building, they don't make any promises that they're going to go and sign this 30-year-old or that 32-year-old at any point. So there was never any misconception that when I walked in that they look to invest in youth players. You know, I think there was some discussion points around the fact that for youth players to progress and to flourish, you do need good experienced players around them. You know, that was probably a healthy discussion point quite regularly. I think if you look at them just now, I agree with what you're saying, and my view is they're light on experience just now. I mean, they're very, very young, but extremely talented young players. But I do believe that you need a couple of dots of experience in and around that. I thought the balance of the team that I picked up when I went to Sunderland was perfect.
Yeah.
You know, I thought we had Dennis Sirkin, you had Dan Neil, you had Jack Clark, you had Patrick Roberts, there's so many young players. We signed Dan Ballard in the summer. So you certainly wouldn't accuse that team of not having a lot of young players in it. But equally, Luke O'Nien, Corey Evans, Alex Pritchard, Ross Stewart, they were equally as important as the other players that were the younger ones coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. That pairing, I think, of Bailey Wright and Danny Bath at centre half. I mean, they were, and then Corey Evans, I suppose, in front of them. That was quite crucial to the 18-game unbeaten run that you had with Sunderland in League One.
Yeah, the guys, when I went in again, it was very similar to the Norwich scenario for me. You know, I went in, I think they were low in confidence at the time. I think they just lost 3 in the bounce. I think one of them was 6-0 away at Bolton, which, to be honest, I think came as a shock to everybody because there was no signs of that result coming, you know, because they'd been in relatively good form. I think they'd been competing for the top 2, certainly early part of the season. It maybe dropped to maybe the top 6 at that point because I think they were about 4th. And then right just before I took over, I think we were either 6th or 7th, I can't remember, but in about that area. But again, that team was basically a case of I just had to go in and try and give them a bit of confidence. I had to get them organised and make sure that we were hard to beat. And because obviously we conceded probably too many goals was probably one of the things we were labelled at as. I think for that respect, we improved a lot. I think we'd naturally gifted players at the top end of the pitch, which we gave quite a lot of freedom to go and express themselves. Because when you're a dribbler like Patrick and Jack, it's not based around patterns. It's based around getting them the ball in the most crucial areas and allowing them to do their stuff, and then having players in key areas that they can then pick out when they're going to combine in that final third. So that was a big focus for that team. But yeah, the balance of the team was perfect. The attitude of the team in terms of appetite to win and the quality we had, it just all aligned itself with each other, and we deserved to go up.
So when you obviously, after you beat Wickham 2-0 in the playoff final, moving into the Championship, do you think that differences in terms of strategy moving forward was a factor behind your decision to move to Stoke in August, or was there a geographical component to that? Talk us through as much as you're able to share. What were you sort of thinking? What were your thoughts were at that point?
No, I think there's been a lot said about it, and the last thing I ever wanted to do was throw fuel on the fire type thing. You know, I think a lot of people have said things about me which are completely untrue. The biggest thing at that point was the fact that we'd just been promoted. So the best example I can give you, right? You sign a striker, he signs a contract. The striker then goes and scores 20 goals and he chaps the door and says, right, I want a new contract. I've just scored 20 goals for you. You do your best to try and obviously satisfy his needs, wouldn't you? Yeah. So we'd just been promoted after 5 or 6 years of trying. And anybody questioning my dedication at that point to Sunderland was crazy, because I wanted to be at Sunderland. And as soon as we got promoted, I wanted to open discussions to extend my stay and to get a better deal and to be part of what the club was going to be moving forward, because that's where I see my future. But the fact was, as far as they were concerned, I'd signed my deal, and that was the deal that I was on, type thing. Which to me at that point didn't show me any faith in me. It didn't show me any sort of security in terms of, we want you to be the guy that's going to take us forward for the next few years. And that was really the key component that then obviously drove everything in after that.
So, what was it about the Stoke job at the time that really appealed to you within the context of the differences, I suppose, that you mentioned with Sunderland?
I think I felt really wanted by Stoke. You know, they'd already made an attempt to get me when I was at Preston, which was really close to me going there at that point in time. But then I sort of backed out at the last minute, which I probably shouldn't have let it get to that stage, really. So that was probably a big factor. When people say about geographically, because obviously I'm the west in terms of where I live.
Well, I say that, Alex, because I think you had a stint assisting David Artell at Crewe for a few weeks as well. So I wondered if there was some sort of geographical component around that sort of area.
No, I only went in with Dave to give. Dave just wanted a fresh pair of eyes, really. You know, because I'd played with Dave and he just said to me, can you come in and have a look and give me your thoughts and things? So that was really the extent of my sort of input at Crewe. But no, I think when we'd been promoted, I had nothing in my mind other than going and furthering that team and furthering the club and trying to achieve what we possibly could. But as I say, obviously there was a difference of probably opinion on what that looked like for me and for the club, which is fine. And then obviously the Stoke opportunity arose. I think we just beat Stoke actually at Stoke 1-0. So that was my last game in terms of the team when I took the team. And yeah, that came up. And like I say, I felt as if Stoke really wanted me. I think with Stoke as well, one of the reasons I didn't go in the first place was obviously when you're in football, you hear stories about what's going on at different clubs and you know people that are at different clubs. And I know Stoke, when they came down, had a real tough time in terms of obviously shifting players. They were in big money and there was loads and loads of things going about at that point. And I'll keep referring back to it because I think it's so important as a coach. Get in somewhere, the timing of when you go in somewhere is so important, because if you go in when you're basically the guy that has to firefight and mop up all the rubbish that's going on before, then what happens is when you leave and the team goes that way, you don't get any recognition of what you've done at that point. You've basically been the guy that's went in and mopped it up, and then the next guy gets all the credit. So yeah, and I felt when Stoke approached that we were getting to a stage. It was probably 6 months earlier than what I would have wanted it to be, if I'm honest. Because I think that to take over and do 10 months with a team which had been just assembled then, obviously with the FFP that we needed to resolve in the January, and with a lot of players who were older players as well, again, coming to an aging squad that we knew the squad was going to get turned around in summer. 10 months to keep fans on side and to give them hope's a long, long time. I mean, like 10 weeks is a long time when you get started and you look at it and you think 10 weeks, that's nothing. But when you're in the building and it's a day-to-day thing and the fans are at the games, and I mean, it's a long, long time to keep them on side.
Yeah, I've felt like with Stoke for the last few years that the challenge has almost been to offload players, more for them to get, because they always seem to have from the outside a really big squad. And I look at the Preston North End side that you had, where you could see a real Alex Neil identity. I wouldn't say you had as many players, but the players that you were there were really part of the team. Whereas at Stoke, it felt like it was difficult to sort of, you're trying to juggle things around and keep everyone happy, and you almost want to condense the squad rather than necessarily, add too many new ones.
Yeah, I think that's a problem for any team. So take Stoke out of the equation. I think if you're at any team and your squad's too big, that's a problem. Because ultimately, if you've got a 25-man squad, right, which is obviously the standard size in terms of what they allow you to have, every single game day that you have, and in the Championship, more often than not, it's 3 games in a week. So every single sort of third or second day, you're basically upsetting more than half your squad because they're not starting the game.
Yeah.
And that can only last so long. And that's what I was saying about being that 10-month period. And I'm not just talking about keeping the fans on side, but you've got players in the building as well. And then when you're trying to recruit and you're recruiting potentially for their position, then naturally players, they're not going to be happy with that because they deem that as a position that they want to play on.
So in terms of the challenge at Stoke, obviously they've spent a lot of money since coming down from the Premier League, and the results, 16th is quite a familiar position for them, and it always seems to be around that bottom half. So do you think that the biggest problem for them is structural? Do you think it's cultural? Do you think it's been a clash of the various different styles and lots of managers coming in and none of them quite having that space to really build something? What do you think is the reason why Stoke have maybe underachieved over the last 5 years?
I think it's probably more down to, like you say, Trotman changing in terms of direction as much as anything else. I know Michael did a few years there, but I think Michael's job, in effect, a lot of it was seeing contracts out and picking up frees and different things like that.
The mopping up thing you mentioned.
Yeah, so I think that I'll give you an example. So when I went in at Sunderland, and everybody's got their opinions on Sunderland's model, but the one thing I will say, it's consistent. So Sunderland's model, I think, might have started under Jack Ross, just towards the tail end of Jack Ross, maybe.
I think they might have brought in Christian Speakman a little bit after that, possibly, but it's a similar time frame, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just say, for talking sake, it started with Jack or even Lee. Okay. But when it started, when Jack was there or when Lee was there, it was consistent. When I came in, it didn't change. When I left and Tony came in, it didn't change. When Tony left and Michael Beale came in, it still hasn't changed. And now when Mike Dodds is now taking it in the interim just now, it's the exact same as it was 3 years ago. And I think for any club, for success, you need to have a plan and you need to have a strategy or a structure. But more importantly, right, that's one thing. You need to let it run its course. You need to let it run its course when it's good, when it's bad, when it's bumpy, when people are not happy, and you need to basically work through it. And if you do work through it, I believe, providing you stick to your principles and your principles are sound, it will be a matter of time until it turns round. But if you look at the teams, right, Ipswich are a great example. Sunderland are a great example. Sheffield Wednesday's a great example. They're all teams that basically hit rock bottom for their club. They ended up in League One. And if you look at the size of the 3 clubs, but what each of the clubs have done now is they've got a structure and a process and a strategy in place. And I would think, well, I know you're doing that, probably doing that at Sheffield Wednesday, I would imagine. But they've got to a point where they are. Sunderland in particular is probably the key one that I'm referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sunderland and Ipswich have done some fantastic work from the point of view of consistency. Absolutely. So in terms of the day-to-day operations at Stoke City, how did you find that from a manager's point of view?
Different. I think every club that I've ever coached is different for a variety of different reasons. I mean, not every club's the same. Every club that I've been at is completely different in terms of how they're structured slightly in certain aspects. How they work in certain aspects. There's maybe a lot of people in this department at that specific club, and then very few, if any, in this department, which is odd because other teams or other clubs might prioritise that. I think structurally, like obviously, as you've already alluded to, Stoke have underachieved for 5-6 seasons, whatever it is, since they came down for the Premier League, and I think that, like you say, I think. What I got from going in there was we wanted a fresh start. We wanted things to change. We wanted things to get restructured. So that was what we set about doing. But like I say, that in itself off the pitch is equally as challenging as what it looks on the pitch. And the difficulty we had at Stoke is the fact we were doing both of them simultaneously at the same time. So there's a lot of changes off the pitch. There's a lot of changes on the pitch. We've brought in 19 players. And I think even for the signings, what people don't really realise is the fact that I think 7 of these signings were permanent, that had been signed for money. But only 3 of them, I think, had been for significant money. And when I mean significant, you're probably talking, I don't know, over £1 million type thing. But a lot of the lads, we picked up, I think, about 7 free transfers. I think we picked up 4 or 5 loans as well.
The contracts, I would imagine, were quite hefty. There's a few players that have been recruited across Europe who were, I'd imagine, on quite large salaries, perhaps.
What we'd focused on, Gabs, was the fact that the ones that we'd put the most money into were basically the younger players that we feel were going to have value. So we didn't invest any significant money into players. And when I mean significant money, I mean in terms of transfer fee, and any players that were going to be older that we wouldn't get a significant return on. So I believe that recruitment is something that when you judge it immediately, it's difficult to say whether it's worked well or not, particularly when you're talking about foreign players. I think over the course of time, the guys that we bought for what we invested in are going to return like countless fold in terms of what they're worth when they do eventually get sold. And I'm thinking along the lines of Whataburger, I'm thinking along the lines of Junho Bay, Junior Chimakdu, the fullback. I think Ryan Mamay, obviously Ryan's situation at the moment, I don't really know what it is, but Ryan for me is a really good player. And again, I think he would have been a real asset for the team. But they were ultimate assets that we invested most of the money into.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully they can come strong at the moment. But I think there's a synergy at the moment that Stoke need to try and find. I think the last few games they have found that. So hopefully they can go on and have some success. As for yourself, Alex, what does your ideal next club look and feel like to you?
I'm not sure, if I'm honest. You know, I've had a couple of conversations with a couple of clubs since I left Stoke, which didn't really feel quite right for me at the time. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I think that, just really something I can get my teeth into that I think's got a bit of stability around it. I think the difficulty you've got is timing of when you go in somewhere again is absolutely key. You know, I think the timing of the Sunderland job for me and for the club was perfect. I think the timing of the Norwich job for me and for the club was perfect. The timing of the Preston job was perfect. I think that's arguably the one thing that wasn't quite right. Arguably when I moved to Stoke was the timing of when I went in and what was sort of needed done for the next 10 months before we got to sort of try to turn things around in the summer and different things. But at the end of the day, I'm not naive in football. The simple fact is you're expected to be successful and win games and beat the top end of the division, and if you're not, particularly in the Championship, it's going to cost you your job. So I've got no gripes, and I've got no so I'm not sitting here wanting anybody to sort of feel sorry for me or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? I'm really quite comfortable with myself, and yeah, could I have done better? Of course you can. I think you can always do better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's life, isn't it? Do you have would it need to be working in the UK for you, Alex? Would you be open to working abroad, do you think?
I'm not sure. I've never considered abroad before. But I think the more and more that you work in the Championship, I think there does come a time where you look and think, would you try something different? Do you need a different setting? Do you need a different scene? I do believe I've got a lot to offer. You know, I think that I've had 3 promotions as a coach. You know, and I think that what I find really funny, obviously, I know, having a baldy head doesn't help me, but there's a lot of these young coaches now coming through, and a lot of them are older than me, and they're saying, "Oh, this young coach, he's only 43," and I'm thinking, yeah,
the experienced Alex Neil.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. You know, I've been doing this for over a decade now, and I don't think people are aware that I'm only 42. Do you know what I mean? So, because
Yeah.
a lot of people start in about their 40s in terms of getting on the sort of coaching ladder, really. So, no, I think for me, I've been really blessed in the fact that I've got a lot of experience at a really young age. And I think I've got a lot more learning and a lot more to achieve as I go forward. But like I say, I think that I want something that I believe in and that also sort of believes that I'm the right person to take it forward. And I think if and I've been fortunate enough to have probably 4 or 5 clubs like sort of that marry up really well for me and for them. And I'd like to think there'll be another one coming on the horizon soon.
I'm sure there will be. I feel like the kind of the template for an Alex Neil team that I want to see probably is the Preston North End side that you had that I absolutely loved watching. Do you think that's the sort of template that you want to try and build towards at your next club, with the obvious caveat that you've got to adapt to personnel and you've got to, more than one way to skin a cat, and you've got to work with what you've got as well?
Yeah, I think anybody who would probably, if you'd associate a team that would be an Alex Neil team, as you say, then I think people would probably look at that Preston team as being aggressive, hard-working, great energy, exciting to watch. Do you know what I mean? Because they were a really good side over the years. And I think that, that's probably, I think, what would be associated me most, which is strange considering they're one of the only teams that I didn't manage to get promoted. But yeah, I think that team, I probably associated with that team as much as any team I've ever had, because I think that I enjoyed the group. I thought they were a really selfless, hard-working, determined group, and I think that stems from the area as well. I think that's what Preston certainly stands for, and probably why I'm settled here and I enjoy it here.
Alex, all the best for the next steps.
Thank you very much, mate.